My name is Laura Bennett, and I'm 29 years old. I suppose I should start by telling you that I've always been the invisible daughter in my family. You know the type. The one who gets good grades, helps with chores without being asked, and never causes any drama. The reliable one, the forgettable one. I'm sitting here in my tiny studio apartment in Buffalo, New York, on this cold February morning, watching the snow pile up against my window. The radiator's making that awful clanking sound it always makes, but I've gotten used to it. Just like I've gotten used to a lot of things in my life that I probably shouldn't have accepted. But today is different. Today, I need to tell someone what happened 3 months ago. The day my entire world shifted on its axis. The day I discovered what my father really thought of me. And the day I finally found my voice. Let me start from the beginning, though. You need to understand my family to understand why what happened hurt so much. My father, Edward Bennett, is 57 years old and works as a manager at a local manufacturing plant. He's one of those men who believes that respect is earned through toughness, that emotions are weaknesses, and that sons are somehow more valuable than daughters. He never said that last part out loud, but trust me, his actions spoke volumes. My mother, Diane, passed away 4 years ago from cancer. She was the glue that held our family together, the one who made sure everyone felt loved and heard. When she died, it was like someone turned off all the warm lights in our house and left us stumbling around in the cold darkness. Then there's Christopher, Chris, my younger brother. He's 25, 4 years younger than me, and he's been the golden child since the day he was born. Chris has this easy charm, this way of making people laugh and forget their troubles. Dad always said Chris reminded him of himself when he was young. Me? I apparently reminded Dad of his sister Martha, who he describes as too serious for her own good. After Mom died, I moved back home for a year to help Dad adjust. Chris had already moved to Rochester for his job in marketing, visiting only on holidays and special occasions. But somehow, even from a distance, he remained the center of Dad's universe. I remember the conversations Dad would have with his friends at the local diner. "Chris is doing so well in Rochester," he'd say, puffing up with pride. "He's got this great apartment, drives a nice car. Real go-getter, that boy." When they'd ask about me, Dad would just nod and say, Laura's doing fine. Still lives nearby. As if that was all there was to say about my entire existence. But here's the thing. I had dreams. Big dreams. Dreams that I'd been nurturing since I was 7 years old. Standing on a chair in Mom's kitchen, helping her frost cupcakes for my school's bake sale. "You have magic hands, sweetheart," Mom used to tell me, watching as I carefully piped frosting roses onto vanilla cupcakes. "Someday, you're going to make people happy with your baking. I can feel it." That someday felt like a fantasy for most of my life. After high school, I went to community college for business administration, then got a job as an administrative assistant at a law firm downtown. It paid the bills, but it didn't feed my soul. Every evening, I'd come home and bake cookies for my coworkers, birthday cakes for friends, elaborate desserts that I'd photograph and post on my small Instagram account. People started asking me to cater small events, baby showers, birthday parties, anniversary celebrations. Word spread, and soon I had a steady stream of weekend orders. The money wasn't much, but it was something. More importantly, it was proof that Mom had been right. I could make people happy with my baking. 2 years ago, I made a decision. I was going to save every penny I could to open my own bakery. Not some grand establishment, just a small, cozy place where people could come for fresh bread, beautiful cakes, and maybe a moment of sweetness in their day. I started working a second job at a local restaurant 3 nights a week, washing dishes until my hands were raw and my back ached. I gave up going out with friends, buying new clothes, even small luxuries like coffee from the cafe near my office. Every dollar went into a mason jar that I kept hidden in the back of my bedroom closet, behind old photo albums and winter sweaters. Dad knew I was saving money, but I never told him exactly how much or what for. Call it intuition. Call it self-preservation. Something told me to keep my dreams close to my chest in that house. By last November, I had saved $15,000. $15,000. It had taken me 2 years of 60-hour work weeks, skipped meals, and worn-out shoes held together with duct tape. But it was enough for a down payment on a small commercial space I'd been eyeing in the Elmwood Village, enough for basic equipment, enough for my dream to finally become reality. I remember the exact moment I counted that money for the last time. It was a Thursday evening in late November. The first snow of the season was falling outside my apartment window, and I had spread all the bills out on my small kitchen table, hundreds and twenties and tens, sorted into neat piles. My hands were shaking as I counted, $15,000 exactly. I took a picture of it with my phone, not to post anywhere, just for myself, proof that I had done it, proof that all those early mornings and late nights had meant something. The next morning, I planned to call the landlord of the Elmwood space and schedule a meeting. I had already drafted a business plan, researched suppliers, even designed a logo, Laura's Kitchen, in elegant script, with a small whisk incorporated into the LA. Mom would have loved it. But first, I wanted to tell Dad. Despite everything, despite feeling invisible for most of my life, I wanted him to know what I'd accomplished. I wanted him to be proud of me, just once. That Friday afternoon, I drove to the family house on Delaware Avenue. It's a modest 2-story colonial that Dad bought when he and Mom first got married. The paint is peeling in places, and the front steps creak when you walk up them. But it's home, or it was anyway. I let myself in with my key. Dad never asked for it back after I moved out, and found him in the living room, watching TV in his old recliner. The room smelled like microwave dinner and stale coffee. "Hey, Dad," I said, hanging my coat on the back of a chair. "How was your day?" "Same as always," he grunted, not looking away from the screen. Work was work. Getting too old for all the standing around. I sat down on the couch across from him, suddenly nervous. How do you tell someone that you've been secretly planning to change your entire life? How do you share a dream with someone who's never really seen you? "Dad, I wanted to talk to you about something," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "I've been saving money, and I think I'm ready to—" "That's good, honey," he interrupted, still focused on the TV. "Saving money is smart. Your mother always said you were responsible with finances." "No, Dad. Listen, I've saved enough to open my own bakery. I found a space. I have a business plan." This time he looked at me, but his expression wasn't what I'd hoped for. Instead of pride or excitement, I saw concern. The kind of concern that feels like pity. "Laura, honey," he said, using that tone adults use when they're about to crush a child's dreams. That's a nice idea. But a bakery? In this economy? Do you have any idea how many small businesses fail in the first year? My heart sank, but I pressed on. I know it's risky, but I've done the research. I've already been catering events, and people love my work. "I think catering a few birthday parties isn't the same as running a business," he said, shaking his head. "You've got a good, stable job at that law firm. Benefits, steady paycheck. Why would you want to throw that away for something so uncertain?" Uncertain. That word hung in the air between us like smoke. I realized then that he wasn't just talking about the bakery. He was talking about me. In his eyes, I was uncertain, unreliable, not someone who could be trusted with something as important as a dream. "I've saved $15,000, Dad," I said quietly. "I've worked 2 jobs for 2 years. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm building something." For a moment, his expression softened. 15,000. Really? I nodded, feeling a spark of hope. Maybe he was starting to understand. Maybe he could see that this wasn't just some whim. That's actually impressive, asked Laura, he said, and I felt something warm bloom in my chest. Really impressive. Your mother would be proud. We talked for another hour. I showed him photos of the commercial space on my phone, explained my business plan, even told him about the logo I'd designed. He listened, really listened, and for the first time in years, I felt like he was seeing me, really seeing me. When I left that night, I was practically floating. I had Dad's cautious blessing, and more importantly, I had his recognition. He had called me impressive. He said Mom would be proud. I should have known it was too good to be true. The call came 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening in mid-December. I was in my apartment, working on a wedding cake for a weekend event, when my phone rang. Dad's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, Dad," I answered, wiping buttercream off my hands. "What's up?" "Laura, honey, I need to talk to you about something." His voice sounded strange, tight, and uncomfortable. "Can you come over tonight? It's important." My stomach dropped. In our family, important as conversations never brought good news. "Is everything okay? Are you sick? Did something happen to Chris?" No, nothing like that. Just, "Can you come over? We need to discuss something." I looked at my half-finished cake. at the delicate sugar flowers I'd been placing with tweezers for the past hour. "Can't we talk on the phone? This needs to be in person, Laura. Please." 40 minutes later, I was back in the living room where I'd shared my dreams with Dad just 3 weeks earlier. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. Dad was pacing, running his hands through his graying hair, avoiding eye contact. "What's going on?" I asked, settling onto the couch. "You're scaring me." He stopped pacing and faced me, his expression a mixture of guilt and defiance that I'd never seen before. "Chris called me last week," he began, and immediately I knew this conversation wasn't going to end well. "He's been offered an opportunity with his company, a chance to spend 3 months in Europe, working with their international division. It would be huge for his career." I waited, sensing there was more. "The thing is, the company will cover most expenses, but he needs to pay for his own accommodations and some travel costs up front. About $15,000. They'll reimburse him when he gets back, but he needs the money now." My blood turned to ice. "Dad, I know what you're thinking, and I promise I'll pay you back every penny, with interest. But Chris, he can't get a loan that quickly. And this opportunity. Laura, this could change his whole life. He could end up managing their European operations. Can you imagine?" I stared at him, my mouth dry. "Are you asking to borrow my savings?" "Just temporarily. Like I said, you'll get it all back, plus interest. And maybe this is a sign that you should wait a bit longer before opening the bakery. Get a little more saved up. Make sure you're really ready." I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was spinning. "Dad, that money. I've worked 2 years for that money. I have meetings scheduled. I've already put down deposits. I know, honey. I know it's not ideal. But family comes first, right? Chris is family. And this is his shot at something really big. I'm family too," I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew how he'd respond. "Of course you are. And that's why I know you'll understand. That's why I know you'll do the right thing. The right thing. As if supporting my brother's dreams was right, and pursuing my own was somehow selfish. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to ask him why Chris's dreams mattered more than mine. Why Chris's future was worth investing in while mine was just a risky whim to be put off indefinitely. Instead, I heard myself asking, "When would you need it?" "Tomorrow, if possible. Chris needs to confirm with his company by Friday. Tomorrow. He wanted me to hand over 2 years of my life tomorrow." I don't remember much about the rest of that conversation. I know I said yes. Of course I said yes. What choice did I have? I was the reliable daughter, the one who did the right thing, the one who put family first. I drove home that night in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I called the landlord and canceled my meeting. I told my weekend wedding client that there might be a delay with her cake. Thankfully, she was understanding. The next evening, I stood in my bedroom closet, looking at that mason jar one last time. The money that had represented freedom, independence, the chance to build something of my own. Gone. Just like that. Dad was waiting in his car outside my apartment building. I handed him the jar through the passenger window, and he didn't even count it. Just took it and said, "You're doing the right thing, Laura. Chris won't forget this." But as I watched his taillights disappear down the street, I realized something that cut deeper than the loss of my money. Dad had never asked what this would mean for me. He'd never asked if I had other plans for that money, never asked how long it would take me to save that much again. He'd simply assumed that my dreams were expendable. That was 3 months ago. Chris left for Europe in January, and according to Dad's updates, he's having the time of his life, working with international clients, staying in beautiful cities, building connections that will serve his career for years to come. I'm still washing dishes 3 nights a week, still putting every spare dollar into a new mason jar. At my current rate, it'll take me another 2 years to save what I lost. I'll be 31 by then, if I'm lucky. The commercial space in Elmwood Village was rented to someone else in January. A young couple opened a vintage clothing boutique there. Every time I drive past it, I imagine what it would have looked like with my sign in the window, my display case full of fresh pastries, my dream finally made real. But here's what really haunts me. Dad never once asked how I was handling the loss. He never acknowledged what I'd given up, never thanked me for the sacrifice. In his mind, I think he genuinely believed he was asking for something small, something that didn't really matter, because I didn't really matter, not the way Chris did. That realization was what finally broke something inside me. Not the lost money, not the delayed dreams, but the understanding that in my father's eyes, I was still the invisible daughter, still the reliable one whose needs came second to everyone else's. I spent most of January and February in a kind of fog, going through the motions of my days but feeling disconnected from everything. My friends noticed. They kept asking if I was okay, if something had happened. But how do you explain that your own father had confirmed your worst fears about your place in his heart? Then Chris came home. Chris came home on a Thursday evening in early March. I knew he was arriving because Dad had been talking about it for weeks, planning a welcome home dinner, buying his favorite beer, even getting the house cleaned professionally for the first time since Mom died. I wasn't planning to be there for his grand return. The thought of sitting around the dinner table, listening to Chris regale us with stories of European adventures funded by my sacrifice, made my stomach turn. But Dad called me that afternoon, with that tone he uses when he's trying to sound casual, but really isn't. "Laura, honey, you're coming to dinner tonight, right? Chris is expecting to see you." Chris is expecting to see you. Not, "I'd love for you to be there," or, "It would mean a lot to our family." Chris was expecting it, so therefore it would happen. "I don't think I can make it, Dad. I have to work late tonight." It was a lie, but a harmless one. "Come on, Laura. He's been gone for 3 months. The least you can do is show up for one dinner. The least I can do." After giving up my dreams to fund his trip, the least I could do was show up to celebrate his return. "Fine," I said, hating how defeated I sounded. "What time?" 7 o'clock. "And Laura, maybe don't mention the money situation tonight. Let's just focus on celebrating Chris's success. Don't mention the money situation." As if my financial sacrifice was some awkward family secret rather than the reason Chris had been able to go to Europe in the first place. I hung up the phone and stared at my reflection in my bathroom mirror. I looked tired. More than tired. I looked worn down, like someone who'd been carrying a heavy weight for too long. My dark hair needed a trim. There were circles under my green eyes, and I'd lost weight over the past few months. Not in a good way, in the way that happens when stress kills your appetite and you forget to take care of yourself. I thought about calling in sick, making some excuse about food poisoning or a migraine, but even as the thought crossed my mind, I knew I wouldn't do it. Because I was still the reliable daughter, still the one who did what was expected, even when it hurt. At 6:45, I stood on the front porch of my childhood home, holding a store-bought apple pie and trying to summon the energy to smile. Through the window, I could see warm light spilling from the dining room, could hear laughter and animated conversation. For a moment, I felt like a stranger looking in at someone else's family celebration. Dad opened the door before I could knock, and his face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since Mom's funeral. "Laura, perfect timing. Chris just finished telling us about his last week in Rome." Rome. Of course he'd been to Rome. "Hey, Dad," I said, handing him the pie. "Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. Don't worry about it." "Come on in. Chris is dying to see you." I followed him through the familiar hallway, past the family photos that hadn't been updated in years, into the dining room where Chris was holding court at the head of the table. He looked good, tanned, relaxed, wearing an expensive-looking sweater I'd never seen before. His sandy hair was longer than usual, styled in a way that looked effortlessly European. Laura." He jumped up and pulled me into a hug that smelled like cologne I couldn't afford. "God, it's so good to see you. You look tired. Are you okay?" Even his concern felt like an insult. "I'm fine. Just been working a lot." "How was your trip?" "Incredible. Absolutely life-changing. I have so much to tell you." Dad had outdone himself with the dinner. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh rolls. The kind of meal he never bothered making when it was just the two of us. We sat down, and Chris immediately launched into story after story about his European adventure. "So there I was in this meeting with the head of our London office," he said, cutting into his chicken with animated gestures. "And he says to me, 'Chris, you have exactly the kind of fresh perspective we need for our expansion into Southeast Asia.' Can you believe it? They're already talking about sending me to Singapore next year." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Dad said, beaming with pride. "Your mother would be so proud to see how far you've come. Your mother would be so proud." The same thing he'd said to me about my bakery dreams, except when he said it to Chris, it felt like a blessing. When he'd said it to me, it felt like a consolation prize. "Mana and the cultural experiences," Chris continued, not seeming to notice that he'd been talking for 20 minutes straight. "Laura, you would love Paris. The bakeries there are incredible. I must have tried pastries from a dozen different places. There's this one spot near the Louvre where they make these croissants that are like nothing I've ever tasted. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. That sounds amazing, I managed. I took pictures of everything. I kept thinking about how much you'd appreciate the artistry. Here, let me show you. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through photos. Look at this eclair. And this tart. The attention to detail is just... He kept talking, showing me image after image of beautiful pastries, gorgeous bakery displays, charming cafe interiors. Each photo was like a small knife twisting in my chest. This was what I'd given up. Not just the money, but the chance to study techniques I'd only read about online, to see firsthand what I was trying to build. Maybe you should plan a trip there someday, Chris said, not looking up from his phone. I mean, obviously it's expensive, but if I saved up, if I started over, worked for another few years, maybe I could afford a week in Paris to look at the bakeries I'd never be able to afford to learn from. Maybe, I said quietly. Oh, and Dad. Chris turned his attention away from me. The company came through with that reimbursement. Got the check yesterday. 15 grand, just like they promised. I'll get you that money back by the weekend. 15 grand, just like they promised. As if it was nothing. As if it hadn't been 2 years of my life. No rush, Dad said, waving his hand. I know you're good for it. But I noticed he didn't look at me when he said it. Didn't acknowledge that it hadn't been his money to lend in the first place. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of Chris's stories and Dad's delighted responses. I smiled and nodded at appropriate intervals, asked polite questions, played the part of the supportive sister. But inside, I felt like I was drowning. Around 9 o'clock, Chris finally seemed to run out of steam. I should probably head to my hotel soon, he said, stretching. I'm still pretty jet-lagged. Hotel? Dad asked. Why are you staying at a hotel? Your room is exactly how you left it. I know, but I'm only in town for a few days. And honestly, after 3 months of amazing hotels, I've gotten used to room service and Egyptian cotton sheets. He laughed. I'm spoiled now. Spoiled now. He was staying in a hotel because he'd gotten used to luxury funded by my sacrifice. The irony wasn't lost on me. Well, at least let me drive you, Dad offered. It's getting cold out there. Actually, Chris said, looking at me, would you mind giving me a ride, Laura? I feel like we barely got to talk one-on-one tonight. I'd love to hear what's been going on with you. The last thing I wanted was to be trapped in a car with Chris, listening to more stories about his incredible European adventure. But Dad was already nodding approvingly, and I found myself saying yes before I could think of an excuse. 20 minutes later, we were sitting in my car outside the Buffalo Marriott downtown, the engine running and the heater blasting against the March cold. Chris was scrolling through his phone again, showing me more photos. This was my apartment in London, he said, holding up a picture of a sleek modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows. 2 bedrooms, fully furnished, right in the heart of the city. The company hooked me up. It's beautiful, I said, and I meant it. It really was beautiful. It was also everything I would never have. I kept thinking about you while I was there, he said, and for a moment, my heart lifted. All those times we talked about traveling when we were kids. Remember? You always said you wanted to see the world. I did remember. When we were children, before life taught me that dreams were luxuries I couldn't afford, I used to talk about visiting every continent, learning to cook authentic dishes from different cultures, maybe even studying at Le Cordon Bleu in Paris. Chris would listen with wide eyes and promise that when he grew up and became rich, he'd take me with him on all his adventures. I remember, I said softly. I actually looked into some baking schools while I was in Paris, he continued, and my breath caught. There are these incredible programs, intensive courses, hands-on training with master pastry chefs. They're expensive, but if you really wanted to do something like that, he trailed off, apparently waiting for me to respond. But I couldn't speak. I couldn't tell him that I'd already looked into those exact programs years ago, that I'd dreamed of saving enough money to spend a summer learning from the best. I couldn't explain that his European adventure had cost me not just my immediate plans, but all the possibilities that had grown from those plans. Chris, I said finally, can I ask you something? Of course. Anything. Did Dad tell you where he got the money for your trip? His expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. He said he had some savings set aside. Why? Some savings set aside. Not, Laura worked 2 jobs for 2 years to save this money, or your sister gave up her dreams to make this possible. Just some savings set aside, as if money materialized out of thin air. Just curious, I said. 15,000 is a lot of money. Yeah, I know. I was really grateful. I mean, I'll pay him back every penny, obviously, but it meant the world that he was willing to help me out. He looked at me more closely. Why? Is everything okay? You've seemed kind of off tonight. Kind of off. That was one way to put it. I'm fine, I lied. Just tired. You know, Laura, he said, his voice taking on that older brother tone that I'd always hated. Maybe you should think about doing something different with your life. I mean, you're almost 30, and you're still working the same job you had in college. Don't you want more than that? Don't you want more than that? Coming from someone who'd just spent 3 months in Europe on my dime, it was almost funny. I'm working on it, I said. Good. I worry about you sometimes. You just seem so settled, like you've given up on having big dreams. Like I've given up on having big dreams. If only he knew how recently I'd been forced to give them up. And why? I should let you get to your hotel, I said. You must be exhausted. Yeah, probably should get some sleep. But Laura, seriously, thank you for dinner tonight. It means a lot to have family support when you're trying to build something big. You know? Family support. The phrase echoed in my head as I watched him walk into the hotel lobby, expensive luggage in tow. Family support had paid for his European adventure, had opened doors to opportunities I'd never even be able to dream of. But somehow, in his mind, he'd earned it all himself. I sat in the hotel parking lot for a long time after he disappeared inside, staring at the lit windows and trying to process what I was feeling. It wasn't just anger, though anger was definitely part of it. It wasn't just sadness, though the grief for my lost dreams was still raw. What I felt was something deeper and more dangerous. The slow, cold realization that I had been taken for granted by the two most important men in my life. They had assumed my sacrifice, counted on my compliance, and never once considered that I might have dreams worth protecting too. But there was something else. Something I hadn't told Chris or Dad during dinner. Something that had been weighing on my mind for weeks now, ever since I'd started going through Mom's old papers while helping Dad organize the house. 3 weeks ago, while looking for Mom's old recipe box in the basement storage room, I'd found a manila envelope with my name written on it in Mom's familiar handwriting. Inside were documents I'd never seen before, papers that cast everything about my family in a completely different light. Papers that would change everything, if I chose to use them. I'd been carrying that envelope around for weeks, unsure what to do with the information inside. But sitting in that hotel parking lot, watching Chris enjoy the fruits of my sacrifice while remaining completely oblivious to the cost, I made a decision. It was time for the truth to come out. It was time for my family to understand exactly who they'd been taking for granted all these years. And it was time for me to stop being the invisible daughter. The envelope sat on my kitchen table for 3 days after Chris's welcome home dinner. Like a ticking bomb, I wasn't sure I had the courage to detonate. Every morning, I'd drink my coffee while staring at Mom's handwriting on the front. For Laura, when you're ready. Every evening, I'd come home from work and find myself drawn to it again, running my fingers over the worn manila edges. Mom had hidden it well. I'd only found it because I was helping Dad organize the basement storage room, a task that had been weighing on both of us since her death 4 years ago. We kept putting it off, neither of us ready to face the boxes of memories and remnants of her life. But Dad had finally decided he wanted to convert the space into a workshop, which meant everything had to be sorted through. Most of what we found was exactly what you'd expect. Old photo albums, Christmas decorations, boxes of our childhood artwork that Mom couldn't bear to throw away. But tucked behind a stack of my high school yearbooks, I'd discovered a small metal filing box I'd never seen before. Inside were important documents, insurance policies, our birth certificates, old tax returns, and the envelope with my name on it. I'd slipped it into my purse without mentioning it to Dad. Something about the way Mom had hidden it, the deliberate placement behind my yearbook specifically, told me this was meant for my eyes only. Now, 3 days later, I was finally ready to open it. Inside were 3 items: a letter in Mom's handwriting, a copy of a legal document I didn't recognize, and a small key attached to a keychain from First National Bank. I started with the letter, my hands trembling slightly as I unfolded the familiar stationery Mom used for all her important correspondence. My dearest Laura, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've probably been taking care of everyone else just like you always do. I hope your father and Chris have been taking care of you too. But knowing our family, I suspect you're still putting yourself last. There are some things I need you to know, sweetheart. Things I should have told you while I was alive, but I was too much of a coward. I kept thinking there would be more time, that I'd find the right moment when the truth wouldn't hurt so much. But cancer doesn't wait for convenient timing, and now I have to trust that you'll find this when you need it most. Laura, you are not Edward Bennett's biological daughter. I know this will come as a shock, and I'm so sorry you have to learn it this way. When I found out I was pregnant with you, Edward and I had been trying for a baby for 3 years. We'd been through fertility treatments, miscarriages, and heartbreak. Edward was starting to withdraw from me, throwing himself into work, and I was desperately lonely. I made a mistake. A beautiful, wonderful mistake that gave me you, but a mistake nonetheless. I had a brief relationship with a man named James Mitchell. He was an artist who was renting the studio space above Elmwood Cafe. You know the one, where you always said you wanted to open your bakery. He was kind and creative, and he saw beauty in everything, just like you do. When I found out I was pregnant, James had already moved to California for a teaching position. I never told him about you, and I never told Edward the truth. By the time you were born, Edward and I were working through our problems, and he was so happy to have a baby that I convinced myself it didn't matter whose DNA you carried. You were ours. You were wanted. You were loved. But as you grew up, I watched Edward struggle to connect with you in ways that came so naturally with Christopher. I told myself it was just personality differences, but deep down, I think some part of him always knew you were different. And I think some part of you always felt it too. I'm not telling you this to hurt you or to excuse Edward's treatment of you. I'm telling you because you deserve to know that you come from a line of dreamers and creators. James was one of the most passionate, artistic people I ever met. Your love of baking, your eye for beauty, your determination to create something meaningful with your hands, that comes from him. In the safety deposit box, key attached, you'll find some of his artwork that I kept, along with his contact information from California. I don't know if he's still there or if he'd want to meet you, but that choice is yours to make. I also need you to know about the trust fund. When my mother died, your grandmother, she left a substantial inheritance. I put most of it in trust funds for you and Christopher, to be accessed when you turned 30. Edward knows about Christopher's trust, but I never told him about yours. I was afraid he'd find a way to use it before you were old enough to make your own decisions about it. Laura, there is $75,000 waiting for you at First National. You can access it in 8 months when you turn 30, or you can access it now by presenting the death certificate, copy included, and this letter to the bank manager. This money isn't charity, and it isn't luck. It's your birthright from a grandmother who wanted to make sure you had the freedom to chase your dreams. She would have loved your bakery idea. She would have been so proud of the woman you've become. I know this is a lot to process, and I know it changes things. But please remember that Edward is still your father in every way that matters. He raised you. He loves you, even if he doesn't always know how to show it. And you are still very much a part of our family. Use this information however you see fit. My darling girl, you owe no one anything, and you deserve every happiness in the world. All my love, always, Mom. I read the letter 3 times before it really sank in. Then I sat in my kitchen chair, staring at the legal documents and the bank key, and laughed. Not a happy laugh, the kind of bitter, exhausted laugh that comes when the universe reveals just how cosmic its sense of humor really is. I wasn't Edward Bennett's biological daughter. The man who had taken my savings to fund my brother's European adventure, who had dismissed my dreams as too risky, who had made me feel invisible my entire life. He wasn't even my real father. And there was $75,000 with my name on it, more than enough to open my bakery, to take that trip to Paris, to build the life I'd always dreamed of. Money that had been waiting for me while I worked 2 jobs and saved every penny, while I sacrificed my future for a brother who was blood related to a man who wasn't even my biological father. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I spent the rest of that weekend in a strange state of emotional suspension, going through the motions of my normal routine, while my entire understanding of my family shifted like tectonic plates. I went to my restaurant job on Saturday night, washing dishes while thinking about James Mitchell, the artist father I'd never known existed. I worked my shift at the law firm on Monday, filing papers while wondering if my love of creating beautiful things had really come from him. And all the while, I carried the secret like a small, powerful engine in my chest, knowledge that could change everything if I chose to use it. The decision came on Tuesday evening, when Dad called with an announcement. "Laura, honey, I wanted to let you know. Chris is having a little celebration tomorrow night. Nothing fancy, just a few friends and family. He got some good news about that Singapore opportunity we talked about." "What kind of good news?" "They offered him the position. Can you believe it? He'll be moving there in the fall, setting up their new Southeast Asia division. The salary is incredible, and they're giving him a housing allowance and everything. Singapore, of course. Another opportunity funded by my sacrifice, leading to even bigger opportunities that would take him even further from any consequences of what he'd taken from me." "That's great news for him," I said carefully. "I thought we could all get together at the house around 7. I'm going to order some catering from that Italian place Chris likes." "You'll be there, right?" I could have said no. I could have made an excuse, avoided the whole situation, continued being the invisible daughter who caused no trouble and made no waves. Instead, I heard myself saying, "I'll be there, Dad, and I'll bring dessert." "Oh, you don't need to do that, honey. I've got everything covered." "I insist," I said, and something in my voice must have convinced him, because he didn't argue. After I hung up, I went to my closet and pulled out the outfit I'd been saving for my bakery's grand opening, a navy blue dress that made me feel confident and professional, paired with the silver necklace Mom had given me for my last birthday before she died. If I was going to reveal the truth, I was going to do it looking like the woman I was meant to be, not the overlooked daughter I'd always been treated as. Then I went to my kitchen and began baking. I made Chris's favorite dessert, a 3-layer chocolate cake with salted caramel filling and dark chocolate ganache frosting. But I also made something else, a small batch of lemon bars using Mom's secret recipe, the one she'd taught me when I was 7 years old and had never shared with anyone else in the family. As I worked, measuring and mixing and folding, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. This was who I was. This was what I was meant to do. And tomorrow night, everyone would finally understand exactly what they'd been taking for granted all these years. Wednesday evening arrived with the kind of crisp March air that promises spring, but hasn't quite delivered it yet. I drove to Dad's house with both desserts carefully secured in the passenger seat and the manila envelope in my purse. I was ready. The celebration was exactly what I'd expected. Dad beaming with pride, Chris holding court in the living room, a handful of his old friends from high school listening to stories about international business and exotic travel opportunities. I recognized most of the faces, people who'd known our family for years, who'd watched Chris and me grow up, who'd probably never questioned the family dynamics they'd observed. "Laura," Chris called out when I walked in. Perfect timing. I was just telling everyone about the Singapore offer. I smiled and held up the cake box. "I brought dessert. Congratulations on the new job. You're amazing. Here, let me introduce you to everyone." For the next hour, I played my role perfectly. I smiled at the right moments, asked interested questions about Chris's new position, accepted congratulations on behalf of our proud family. I served the chocolate cake and watched everyone rave about it, watched Chris beam, as if my baking skills somehow reflected well on him. "God, Laura, this is incredible," said Mike, one of Chris's college friends. "You should open a bakery or something. That's actually been a dream of mine," I said lightly, and I saw Dad shift uncomfortably in his chair. "You should totally do it," Mike continued. "I'd invest in a place that makes cake like this. Maybe someday," I said, catching Dad's eye, "when I have the right funding." Around 9 o'clock, people started to filter out. By 9:30, it was just Dad, Chris, and me, sitting in the living room with empty cake plates and the comfortable exhaustion that comes after a successful party. "That was perfect," Chris said, stretching out in his chair. "Thanks for making tonight so special, you guys. It means everything to have family support." There was that phrase again. Family support. "Chris," I said, setting down my coffee cup, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you remember what Dad told you about where the money for your Europe trip came from?" Both Dad and Chris looked at me with sudden wariness. This wasn't the kind of question the reliable daughter was supposed to ask. "Laura," Dad said carefully, "I thought we agreed." "I didn't agree to anything," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. I asked a question. "Chris, do you remember what Dad told you?" Chris glanced between Dad and me, clearly sensing the tension, but not understanding its source. "He said he had some savings set aside." "Why?" "Just curious about what story he told you," I said. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila envelope. Because I have a story to tell too. Laura, Dad's voice carried a warning now. What are you doing? I'm telling the truth, Dad. For the first time in my life, I'm telling the whole truth. I opened the envelope and pulled out Mom's letter, holding it carefully in my hands like the precious, dangerous thing it was. Chris, that $15,000 didn't come from Dad's savings. It came from me. I worked 2 jobs for 2 years to save that money so I could open a bakery. Dad asked me to give it up so you could go to Europe. And I said yes, because that's what I always do. I put everyone else's dreams ahead of my own. The silence that followed was deafening. Chris stared at me with his mouth slightly open, while Dad's face had gone very pale. That's not... Chris started, then stopped. Dad, is that true? Dad looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. It's more complicated than that. No, I said firmly. It's actually very simple. You took my money without my permission and gave it to Chris. You let him believe it was your sacrifice instead of mine. And you never once asked what it would cost me to give up 2 years of savings. Laura, honey, I was going to tell him eventually, and I promised you'd get every penny back. When? I interrupted. When was I going to get it back? Because it's been 3 months, and Chris has already been offered another opportunity in Singapore. How long before the next adventure, the next investment in his future, that somehow takes priority over mine? Chris was looking back and forth between us, like he was watching a tennis match. Wait, Laura, I had no idea. If I'd known it was your money, what would you have done differently? I asked, genuinely curious. Would you have turned down the opportunity? Would you have found another way to fund your trip? He didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. I thought so, I said. And that's okay, Chris. I understand why you took it. The opportunity was incredible, and you deserved to pursue it. But what I don't understand is why my dreams were considered expendable, while yours were treated like sacred investments. I looked at Dad, whose face had gone from pale to gray. Do you want to know what really hurts? It's not the money. It's that you never asked what giving it up would mean to me. You never considered that I might have been counting on it for something important. In your mind, I was just the reliable daughter with no real ambitions, so taking my savings didn't seem like stealing a future, just borrowing some cash. That's not true, Dad said weakly. I know how hard you work. I know you have dreams. Do you? I pulled Mom's letter from the envelope. Because I'm starting to think you've never really seen me at all. And then I told them everything. About James Mitchell, about the trust fund, about the fact that I wasn't biologically Edward Bennett's daughter. I watched Dad's face crumble as I read Mom's letter aloud, watched Chris struggle to process the revelation that his sister wasn't really his sister, that the family he'd always known was built on a 30-year-old secret. When I finished reading, the silence stretched for a long, long time. Finally, Dad spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I always wondered. He said, you were so different from the rest of us, but your mother insisted, and I wanted to believe. You wanted to believe you were my father, I said gently, and in every way that mattered, you were. You raised me. You taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework and walked me down the aisle at my friend's wedding when she asked you to stand in for her own father. Those things don't change because we don't share DNA. I saw tears in his eyes, and my heart broke a little, despite everything. I didn't want to hurt him. I just wanted him to see me. But somewhere along the way, I continued, you started treating me like I was less important than Chris. Like my dreams were less valid, my future less worth investing in. And I need you to understand that whether we're biologically related or not, that treatment was wrong. Chris had been quiet through all of this, but now he spoke up. Laura, I'm so sorry. I had no idea about any of this. About the money, about everything. I looked at him. Really looked at him, for the first time in years. Without the haze of resentment and hurt feelings, I could see that he genuinely hadn't known about the source of his trip funding. He looked stricken, guilty, and completely overwhelmed. I know you didn't, I said. That's part of the problem. It never occurred to anyone in this family to ask what I might be sacrificing to support your dreams. I stood up, smoothing my navy dress, and picked up my purse. I'm going to the bank tomorrow to access my trust fund. I'm going to open my bakery, and I'm going to build the life Mom wanted me to have. I'm going to stop being invisible. Laura, wait. Dad stood up too, reaching out toward me. Please don't leave like this. Let's talk about this. Let's figure out how to fix it. I paused at the doorway. looking back at the two men who had shaped my life in such different ways. Dad, you can start fixing it by paying me back the $15,000 you took. Not because Chris reimburses you, but because you recognize that you stole from me and you want to make it right. I turned to Chris. And Chris, you can stop treating my sacrifices like they're invisible. The next time someone does something to help you succeed, maybe ask what it cost them. As I walked toward my car, I heard Chris call after me. Laura, the money, let me pay you back myself, right now. I have the check from my company. I stopped and turned around. He was standing in the doorway, his expensive European clothes and perfect haircut making him look like a stranger. Keep your money, Chris, I said. Buy yourself something nice in Singapore. I don't need your reimbursement anymore. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was upset or anxious, but because I felt more awake than I had in years. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time since Mom died, I could actually envision a future that belonged entirely to me. At 8:30 the next morning, I was standing outside First National Bank when they unlocked the doors. The bank manager, Mrs. Patterson, was a woman in her 60s who had known my family for years. When I presented Mom's letter and the key to the safety deposit box, her professional demeanor softened into something warmer. "And your mother was a remarkable woman," she said, leading me to the vault. "She came in regularly to add to your account. She was so excited about your dreams, always talking about your baking. Mom had been adding to my account, even while she was battling cancer, even during her final months. She'd been thinking about my future." The safety deposit box contained exactly what Mom had promised: contact information for James Mitchell in California, several small paintings and sketches that took my breath away with their beauty, and paperwork for a trust fund that had grown to $78,000 over the years. But there was also something Mom hadn't mentioned in her letter: a business plan. Written in her careful handwriting, it outlined everything needed to open a small bakery, startup costs, equipment lists, marketing strategies, even potential locations. At the bottom, she'd written, "For Laura's Kitchen, a dream worth investing in." I sat in that sterile bank vault and cried like I hadn't cried since her funeral. "Take your time, dear," Mrs. Patterson said gently, setting a box of tissues beside me. There's no rush." An hour later, I walked out of the bank with a cashier's check for $78,000 and a heart so full I thought it might burst. I drove straight to the Elmwood Village, parked outside the vintage clothing boutique that had taken my original dream space, and called the commercial real estate agent I'd worked with months ago. "Laura, I was wondering when I'd hear from you again." Janet's voice was warm and surprised. "How can I help you?" "I need a space for a bakery," I said, watching people walk past on the sidewalk, going about their morning routines. Something small and charming, preferably in this neighborhood, and I need it as soon as possible. "Well, you're in luck. I actually have a space that just became available yesterday. The previous tenant had to break their lease. It's smaller than what you looked at before, but it has character. Are you free to see it this afternoon?" The space was perfect, located 3 blocks from my original choice. It was a narrow storefront with huge windows, original hardwood floors, and a tin ceiling that had been painted over so many times it looked like frosting. The previous tenant had been a used bookstore, and the whole place still smelled faintly of old paper and possibility. "The rent is $2,200 a month," Janet explained as we walked through the empty space. "The previous tenant left some shelving units, and that back room would be perfect for your kitchen area. I could already see it, display cases along the windows, small cafe tables scattered throughout, the warm smell of fresh bread mixing with coffee and cinnamon. I could see the logo I'd designed months ago painted on the front window, could imagine customers lined up for Saturday morning pastries. "I'll take it," I said. "Don't you want to think about it? Discuss it with your family." I looked out the front window at the tree-lined street, at the other small businesses that made this neighborhood feel like a community. "No," I said. "This is my decision." That afternoon, I signed the lease, put down the first and last month's rent, and officially became a business owner. By evening, I was sitting on the floor of my empty bakery space, eating takeout Chinese food and making lists of everything I needed to do. My phone had been buzzing all day with calls and texts from Dad and Chris, but I hadn't been ready to talk to them yet. I needed this day to be just about me, about moving forward instead of looking back. But around 8 o'clock, as I was researching commercial ovens online, Chris appeared at my front window. He looked terrible, hair disheveled, eyes red-rimmed, wearing the same clothes from the night before. When I unlocked the door, he practically fell inside. Alora, thank God. I've been looking everywhere for you. Dad said you weren't at work, and you weren't at your apartment. How did you find me here? I remembered you mentioning this neighborhood once. I've been walking up and down the street for an hour. He looked around the empty space with wonder. Is this my bakery? I said simply. Laura's kitchen? I signed the lease this afternoon. You got the money from the bank. I got my money from the bank. My inheritance. My future. He ran his hands through his hair, making it even messier. Laura, I didn't sleep at all last night. I kept thinking about everything you said, about the money, about all of it. Chris, no, let me say this. Please. He took a shaky breath. I've been an ass. A complete selfish ass. Not just about the money, but about everything. I've been so focused on my own career, my own opportunities, that I never stopped to think about what anyone else might be sacrificing to help me succeed. I sat down on a paint can that someone had left behind, suddenly exhausted. Chris, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because it's not just about the $15,000, is it? It's about years of family dinners where I talked about myself for hours while you listened. It's about Dad bragging about my achievements while treating yours like hobbies. It's about me taking your support so completely for granted that I never even thought to ask where my trip funding came from. He sat down on the floor across from me, and I was startled to see tears in his eyes. Do you know what I realized last night? I realized that I don't actually know anything about your life. I know you work at a law firm and you like to bake, but I don't know what you dream about at night. I don't know what makes you happy or what keeps you awake worrying. I don't know what kind of music you listen to when you're alone, or what your favorite book is, or if you've ever been in love. My throat tightened. Chris, I'm your brother. I should know those things. And the fact that I don't, the fact that I've been so wrapped up in my own world that I've completely ignored yours, that's not the kind of person I want to be. We sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the echo of our voices in the empty space. Tell me about the bakery, he said finally. Tell me what you're going to build here. So I did. I told him about my plans for the display cases and the cafe tables, about the specialty cakes I wanted to offer, and the bread I planned to bake fresh every morning. I told him about the community I wanted to create, about making this a place where people could come for both celebration and comfort. As I talked, I watched his face change. The self-absorption that had always been there, that casual assumption that his story was the most interesting one in any room, gradually gave way to something I'd never seen from him before. Genuine interest in someone else's dream. It sounds incredible, he said when I finished. It sounds like exactly the kind of place this neighborhood needs. I hope so. Laura, I want to help. I know you don't need my money now, but I want to be involved somehow. I want to be the kind of brother who supports your dreams instead of taking them for granted. I studied his face, looking for any sign that this was just guilt talking, that he'd go back to his old patterns once the shock of last night's revelations wore off. But what I saw was something deeper, a kind of awakening, like he'd just realized there was a whole world outside of his own ambitions. How? I asked. I don't know yet. Maybe I could help with marketing. I do work in that field, and I have some connections. Or maybe I could just be here sometimes, help with the grand opening, be an actual supportive brother instead of a self-absorbed one. What about Singapore? His face fell slightly. I turned it down. Chris, no. You didn't turn down your dream job because of what happened last night. It wasn't my dream job, he said quietly. It was just another impressive line on my resume, another thing to make Dad proud. But sitting in that hotel room last night, thinking about how I'd built my entire career on other people's sacrifices without even realizing it, I don't want that kind of success anymore. So what do you want? He was quiet for a long moment, looking around at my empty bakery space. I want to figure out how to be the kind of person who deserves the support I've been given. I want to understand what it feels like to build something meaningful instead of just climbing the next rung of the ladder. And Singapore? I told them I needed to stay in Buffalo for family reasons, which is true. I do need to stay here and figure out how to be a better son and brother. The company wasn't thrilled, but they're keeping the position open for 6 months in case I change my mind. I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of resentment I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. Chris, you don't have to give up your career goals because of what happened. I'm not giving them up. I'm just reevaluating them. I'm 25 years old, and I've been so focused on impressing other people that I've never stopped to ask what would actually make me happy. We talked for another hour, sitting on the floor of my future bakery as the sun set outside the windows. For the first time in years, it felt like we were actually siblings instead of strangers who happened to share a father. When Chris finally left, promising to check in over the weekend, I called Dad. "Laura." His voice was rough, like he'd been crying. "Honey, are you okay? I've been so worried." "I'm okay, Dad. Better than okay, actually. I'm sitting in my new bakery space." "You're what?" "I went to the bank today. I accessed Mom's trust fund, and I leased a space for Laura's kitchen. I'm finally doing it, Dad. I'm opening my bakery." The silence on the other end stretched so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. "Dad, I'm here," he said finally. "And I'm trying to process everything that's happened. Laura, about last night, about what your mother's letter said. Dad, we don't have to talk about the paternity thing right now. That's complicated, and we both need time to figure out what it means. No, but I need to say this. Whether you're biologically mine or not, you are my daughter. You will always be my daughter. And I have failed you so badly, sweetheart. I have treated you like you didn't matter, like your dreams weren't worth investing in. And I am so sorry." His voice broke on the last words, and I found myself crying again. "I know you are," I said, "and I forgive you. But Dad, things have to be different going forward. I can't go back to being invisible." "You were never invisible to me," he said. I didn't know how to connect with you the way I connected with Chris. You were so self-sufficient, so capable. I thought you didn't need me the way he did. I needed you differently than he did. I needed you to see my potential instead of just my reliability. I needed you to believe in my dreams instead of warning me about all the ways they might fail. I know that now. And Laura, about the money, I'm paying you back every penny, with interest. I don't care if it takes me years. Dad, no, I insist. What I did was wrong, and I need to make it right. Chris told me he tried to pay you back last night, and you told him to keep it, but I can't keep it. I can't benefit from stealing your future, even if you don't need that particular money anymore. I thought about arguing, but something in his voice told me this was important to him. Maybe accepting his repayment was part of letting him prove he could be better. "Okay," I said, "but I'm using that money for the bakery too. Every penny is going toward building the dream you once dismissed as too risky." "Good," he said firmly. "That's exactly what it should go toward." We talked for another few minutes, making tentative plans for him to see the bakery space over the weekend. When I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years. My phone buzzed with a text from Chris. "Spent the evening researching small business marketing strategies. Can't wait to help you build something amazing." And then, unexpectedly, another text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hi, Laura. This is James Mitchell. Your father got my information from your mother's papers and reached out. I'd love to talk to you whenever you're ready. No pressure, just know that I'm here." I stared at that text for a long time, thinking about the paintings in Mom's safety deposit box, about the artistic DNA that might explain my need to create beautiful things. But that was a conversation for another day, another chapter of my story. Tonight, I was exactly where I needed to be, sitting on the floor of my own bakery space, surrounded by possibility and the lingering smell of old books, planning the future I'd always deserved. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't expendable. I wasn't anyone's afterthought. I was Laura Bennett, baker and business owner, daughter and sister and dreamer. And I was finally free. 6 months later, I stood in front of Laura's kitchen at 5:30 in the morning, keys in hand, watching the sunrise paint the Elmwood Village in shades of gold and pink. The painted sign in my window, that elegant script with the whisk incorporated into the L, caught the early light beautifully. Today was opening day. I'd been up since 3, putting the finishing touches on display cases filled with croissants, muffins, Danish pastries, and the signature cinnamon rolls that had become legendary among my taste testers. The smell of fresh bread and brewing coffee filled the space, mixing with the scent of the flowers Chris had delivered yesterday. A gorgeous arrangement from the whole family with a card that read, "To the most courageous woman we know, we're so proud of you. Love, Dad and Chris." The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of permits and equipment purchases, recipe testing and staff hiring. I'd thrown myself into building the bakery with the same determination I'd once used to save money, except this time I wasn't sacrificing. I was creating. Dad had kept his word about the money. Every Friday for the past 26 weeks, He'd stop by my apartment with an envelope containing $300 in cash. "Payment plan?" he'd say gruffly, then usually linger to ask about the bakery's progress or offer to help with some task that needed doing. Last week, he'd made his final payment, and I'd watched him tear up as he handed me that last envelope. "I'm proud of you," he'd said simply. "Your mother would be so proud of what you've built." Chris had also kept his word, in ways that had surprised me. After turning down Singapore, he'd taken a position with a local marketing firm and thrown himself into helping with Laura's Kitchen's branding and social media presence. More importantly, he'd become the brother I'd always wished for, someone who asked about my day and actually listened to the answers, who remembered the things that were important to me, who showed up without being asked when I needed help moving equipment or painting walls. "I'm learning how to be a person instead of just a resume," he'd told me one evening as we worked together to install the bakery's new espresso machine. "It's harder than I thought it would be, but it's better too." The changes in our family hadn't been instant or easy. We'd had difficult conversations about Mom's secret, about years of imbalanced dynamics, about the ways we'd all failed each other. But slowly, carefully, we'd begun rebuilding our relationships on a foundation of honesty instead of assumption. I'd also reached out to James Mitchell. That first phone call had been terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. James was 62 now, a retired art professor living in Sacramento with his wife of 20 years. When I told him who I was, there was a long silence followed by what sounded like quiet weeping. "I wondered," he'd said finally, "when your mother and when I left Buffalo, I wondered if there might be consequences. But Diane never reached out, and I convinced myself there was nothing to wonder about." We'd talked for hours that first night, and many times since. He'd sent me photos of his artwork, stories about his life, and most precious of all, memories of my mother during those few months they'd shared. She was luminous, he'd told me. Sad about her marriage troubles, but luminous. She talked about wanting to create beauty in the world, about believing that food made with love could heal people's hearts. "When I see pictures of your bakery online, I see her dreams coming true through your hands." James and his wife, Patricia, were planning to visit Buffalo next month for the first time in 30 years. I was nervous and excited in equal measure about meeting the man whose artistic DNA had apparently shaped so much of who I was. But today wasn't about the past or even the future. Today was about the present moment, about the dream I'd refused to let die, even when everyone around me suggested it wasn't worth pursuing. At 6 o'clock sharp, I turned the sign in my window from closed to open and unlocked the front door. My first customer was Mrs. Patterson from the bank, who'd been following my progress on social media and had promised to be first in line on opening day. She ordered a latte and 2 of my signature cinnamon rolls, and as I handed her the bag with Laura's Kitchen stamped on the front, I felt a surge of pride so intense it almost knocked me over. "This is exactly what this neighborhood needed," she said, looking around at the warm lighting and carefully arranged tables. "Your mother would be over the moon." By 7 o'clock, there was a line out the door. Word had spread through the neighborhood about the new bakery, and the combination of Chris's marketing savvy and my months of recipe testing had created genuine excitement. I watched people take their first bites of my pastries and saw their faces light up with surprise and delight. "Oh my God," I heard one woman say to her friend, "this eclair is better than anything I had in Paris." Paris. The word that had once represented everything I couldn't have now just made me smile. I'd built something here that was mine, something that brought joy to people's mornings, something that proved dreams could survive even when they were deferred. Around 10 o'clock, during a brief lull in the morning rush, Dad and Chris walked in together. Dad was wearing his best shirt and a tie I'd given him for Christmas, and Chris had brought his camera to document the moment. "How's it going, sweetheart?" Dad asked, his voice thick with emotion, as he looked around at the bustling bakery. "Better than I ever imagined," I said, and I meant it. Chris ordered Dad's coffee and convinced him to try one of my experimental lavender shortbread cookies. I watched Dad take a bite, saw his eyes widen with surprise, and felt my heart swell as he turned to Chris and said, "This is incredible. Your sister is incredible. Your sister is incredible. Not Laura makes good cookies, or this is a nice little hobby. Your sister is incredible." They stayed for an hour, Dad charming my customers with stories about how proud he was of his daughter, the business owner. Chris taking photos and posting them to the bakery's social media accounts with captions about family pride and following your dreams. As they were getting ready to leave, Dad pulled me aside. "Laura, I need you to know something, he said quietly. I've been thinking a lot about what your mother wrote in that letter, about James and about you not being my biological daughter. My stomach clenched. We'd talked around this topic for months but never addressed it directly. And I need you to know that it doesn't matter. Not one bit. You are my daughter in every way that counts. You have been from the day you were born, and you always will be. I don't care whose DNA you carry. You're a Bennett, and I'm proud to be your father. I hugged him then, right there in the middle of my busy bakery, and felt years of insecurity and doubt finally settle into peace. The rest of opening day passed in a blur of customers and compliments, of sold-out pastry cases and plans for tomorrow's baking schedule. By closing time, I was exhausted but exhilarated, covered in flour and radiating happiness. As I locked up that first night, I found a note that had been slipped under my door. It was from Maria, the woman who ran the vintage clothing boutique in my original dream location. Laura, congratulations on your grand opening. I heard the line was around the block all day. I wanted you to know that I've been following your journey on social media, and I'm so inspired by your determination to make your dreams happen despite the obstacles. I also wanted to apologize. When I rented the space you'd originally wanted, the landlord mentioned that the previous applicant had to withdraw due to financial issues. I didn't know the story behind that at the time, but now I understand it was part of your path to this perfect location. Sometimes the detours lead us exactly where we're supposed to be. Looking forward to being your neighbor and your customer. Best wishes, Maria P.S. My daughter's birthday is next month, and she's obsessed with unicorns. Any chance you do custom cakes? I read the note twice, smiling at the gentle wisdom in her words. Sometimes the detours lead us exactly where we're supposed to be. She was right. If I'd opened my bakery in that other location last year, I might never have had the confidence to dream bigger, to invest in better equipment, to create the warm, community-focused space that Laura's Kitchen had become. The sacrifice that had felt like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of something better. I spent the evening in my apartment, finally allowing myself to process what had happened. I'd done it, despite every obstacle, despite having my savings stolen and my dreams dismissed, despite years of feeling invisible and unimportant. I'd done it. Laura's Kitchen was real. It was mine. It was proof that sometimes the most broken-looking paths lead to the most beautiful destinations. My phone buzzed with messages throughout the evening, photos from customers posting about their morning pastries, congratulations from friends who'd supported me through the difficult months, and finally, a text from an unknown California number. Laura, this is James. Patricia and I spent the day following your bakery's social media posts about the grand opening. We're so proud of you, and we can't wait to meet you in person next month. Your mother's dreams are alive and thriving in everything you've created. Love from your biological father, and Patricia, who already considers herself your stepmother. I set my phone aside and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the city lights of Buffalo. For 29 years, I'd felt like I was waiting for my real life to begin, waiting for someone to notice me and believe I was worth investing in. But I'd had it backwards. I hadn't needed anyone else to believe in me. I'd needed to believe in myself enough to stop waiting for permission to pursue my dreams. I'd needed to stop being the invisible daughter and start being the visible woman. The woman who now owned a successful bakery in the heart of Elmwood Village. The woman who'd rebuilt her family relationships on terms of mutual respect and genuine affection. The woman who'd learned that sometimes losing everything is actually finding yourself. 3 weeks later, I was frosting a 3-tier wedding cake when Chris walked into the bakery during the afternoon lull. He'd been stopping by regularly, not just to help with marketing, but to check in as a brother, to be present in my life the way I'd always been present in his. "So how's business today?" he asked, settling into his favorite chair at the counter. "Steady," I said, carefully piping roses onto the top tier. Mrs. Henderson ordered 4 dozen cupcakes for her grandson's school party, and I have 2 birthday cakes for pickup tomorrow. And the catering inquiry? They want me to provide dessert for a corporate retreat next month. 200 people. I paused in my piping to look at him. Plus, I never thought I'd be saying no to business because I'm too busy to take on more. That's a good problem to have. We chatted for a few minutes about his work, about Dad's plans to finally start that woodworking hobby he'd been talking about for years, about ordinary sibling things that felt extraordinary because they were built on honesty instead of assumption. "Chris," I said as he was getting ready to leave, "can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret turning down Singapore?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "You know what's funny? I thought I would. I thought I'd spend months wondering what I'd given up, but I've never been happier. This version of my life, where I'm connected to my family, where I'm building something meaningful instead of just climbing a ladder, this is better than any job title could have been. He paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression I was still getting used to, genuine affection mixed with respect. Besides, he added with a grin, Singapore's not going anywhere. If I ever decide I want that kind of adventure, there will be other opportunities. But there's only one Laura, and I spent too many years taking you for granted. I'm not making that mistake again. After he left, I finished the wedding cake and spent the rest of the afternoon preparing for the next day's early morning baking. As I worked, measuring flour, checking inventory, planning the weekend's special offerings, I thought about how different my life looked now compared to 6 months ago. 6 months ago, I'd been invisible, expendable, someone whose dreams could be borrowed without permission or consequence. Today, I was a business owner, a respected member of my community, someone whose opinion mattered and whose presence was valued. The transformation hadn't required magic or miracles. It had required courage, the courage to stop accepting less than I deserved, to speak truths that were uncomfortable, to build something beautiful out of the ashes of disappointment. As I locked up Laura's kitchen that evening, I caught my reflection in the front window. The woman looking back at me was confident, purposeful, radiant with the satisfaction of meaningful work. She looked like someone who belonged exactly where she was. She looked like someone who had never been invisible at all. She'd just been waiting for the right moment to step into the light. And now, finally, beautifully, brilliantly, she was shining. Laura's kitchen has become the heart of the Elmwood Village. The morning regulars know each other by name, and the afternoon crowd includes students from the local college who come to study while eating my famous chocolate chip cookies. I've hired 3 part-time employees, and we're already talking about expanding into the empty space next door. Dad stops by every Friday, not to make payments anymore, but because it's become our tradition. He orders the same thing, black coffee and whatever pastry I recommend, and we talk about everything and nothing while he watches me work. Sometimes he brings his own creations from his new woodworking hobby, and the bakery now features several of his handmade display stands. Chris met someone, a teacher named Sarah, who loves that he's more interested in building community connections than climbing corporate ladders. They're talking about moving in together, and Sarah has become one of my closest friends. She teaches 2nd grade, and her class has adopted Laura's Kitchen as their neighborhood business to study. Once a month, I give tours to 25 7-year-olds who ask the most wonderfully direct questions about flour and ovens and following your dreams. James and Patricia visit every few months now. It's still strange having a biological father, but it's also wonderful in ways I never expected. James understands my artistic temperament, and Patricia loves to help me develop new recipes. They've become part of my Buffalo family, filling a space I didn't even know was empty. Last month, I catered Chris's company's annual gala, the same company that had once offered him the Singapore position. The CEO pulled me aside afterward to tell me it was the best event food they'd ever served, and to ask if I'd consider opening a 2nd location near their corporate headquarters. I told him I'd think about it, because now I have the luxury of thinking about opportunities instead of desperately chasing them. Now I can choose my adventures, instead of being grateful for whatever scraps of possibility come my way. But mostly, I'm happy exactly where I am, standing in my own bakery at 5:30 every morning, watching the sunrise paint Elmwood Village in gold, creating beauty with my own hands, and sharing it with people who appreciate what I've built. I am Laura Bennett, baker and business owner, daughter and sister and dreamer. I am visible. I matter. I'm exactly where I belong. And every single day, I'm grateful for the detour that led me home to myself.